So in this series, we're going to look at a little bit more detail related to the subcategories that we had mentioned before. And so specifically, we're going to look at some components of productivity, some components in the decision-making process, and some components of team membership and team management. And we'll also take a look at some different planning styles. In our first chart on productivity, you can see that we have our team members identified, and we've got our team averages in the blue bar with the red numbers. And we're looking at specifically organizational skills, attitude towards productivity, the ability or willingness to delegate, people's ability to integrate various forms of information, and then to develop and adhere to productive systems. And when we look at each component in a little bit more detail, we can see that on organizational skills, candidate B tends to be below the capabilities of the other people, and subject E tends to be higher. And I'm wondering if there's a correlation between a positive attitude towards organization and productivity and somebody's willingness to develop proper organizational skills. And so here we can see that member E has very strong attitude towards productivity and also is very organized in their approach. Similarly, member D shows same kind of levels, and member C and member A. And where we see a lower level of positive attitude towards productivity, and maybe that's a commitment to productivity, we also see lower levels of organizational skills. Now, other things may come into play as well, but right off the bat, we can say, is there a correlation there? And we could also say, is there the opportunity to look at the techniques used by some of the other team members, specifically team member E, that may be of value in helping team member B to be more organized in their approach. In regards to delegation, everybody seems to be fairly good at that. Obviously, member C stands out, and perhaps member E could enter in some sort of discussion and find some avenues to make them more comfortable to delegate a little bit. I mean, we're not seeing a significantly low score on this, but that could be helpful. Certainly, if we're looking at people from a leadership and managerial capability standpoint, you have to be able to delegate. When we move to information integration, this is going to be interesting. I'm going to hopefully remember to make a correlation between this and cognitive capability down the line. But we see significantly high scores here. And in this case, I know I'd mentioned before, we might be worried when we see significantly high scores. In this case, I don't think that that's a big issue. It's showing that these two, member C and member E, are very good at integrating vast amounts of information and perhaps seemingly unrelated. So these are very good scores, and again, the team in general is very good at that. As well, in adhering to and developing productive systems, they seem to be fairly strong at that as well. So across the board, we're seeing a few things that we could enhance the performance in, a few areas that we could perhaps use the advice or the methodology of other team members to help some team members to enhance their performance related to productivity to a certain extent. In our next chart, we're looking at planning styles and how people can have a preference for different planning styles, and then of course the impact on performance for both individuals and then as an accumulated preference for groups. And we divide our styles into four main categories. The first being objectives-oriented planning, where people prefer to have a specific measurable goal and also timelines in which to achieve it. The second style is called domain and directions planning, and this is where people set that overall goal, but they prefer not to have specific deadlines or specific details in the stages to achieve that goal. The next one is called task-oriented planning. This is where there is no final goal. In this case, people prefer to think about things, actions, and tasks along the way, and then to adapt to the results that they see, and hopefully they're headed in a positive direction. The next is called existential planning, and this is where people believe that there's some higher force that will take care of them, and in effect it's not really planning at all. We can first look at our team preferences, and we see that the majority of our team members prefer objectives-oriented planning, and that's evident in the preferences of member A, member C, and member D. That's their main preference. And what's interesting is when we look at member E, we see lower scores, which is not a bad thing, but a balance between objectives-oriented planning and domain and direction planning, which tells me that they're adaptable to both planning styles. Now, so would the other people. Their preference are for what I would call the two major styles, so their dominant preference and their secondary preference. And of course, we're seeing an element of existential in almost each person. But again, it's what's their dominant preference, and people perform best when they're working in a way that meets their primary desired way to perform. And so it could be possible that candidate B could be dysfunctional from this aspect, from a planning aspect and a planning and performance aspect, because their dominant preference is more domain and direction planning, which in effect means that they don't like to have specific details and timelines. So they're going to be different than the rest of the group. Now, what's good about this situation is that this individual is also open and understands a lot of the components of objectives-oriented planning. So similar to member E, member B is going to have an adaptable an ability to adapt to what the majority prefers. And I would be more concerned if we didn't see that awareness of objectives-oriented planning, because it could create some level of dysfunction in the group. Another thing to consider is what is the planning style of the next level manager above this team. And that style needs to adapt to the majority style. And so not only do we want to make sure that people who have a different planning preference or a different performance preference in general, that they adapt, or we provide them with methods to adapt to the style that we're choosing to work under. We also need to make sure that the next level manager is aware of the planning preferences of their team, and so that they can adapt their approach to the team, not the team adapting the team's approach to the managers. In this chart, we're looking at the various components that could be relevant to a solid decision-making process. And you'll probably recall that in a previous section, we looked at decision-making speed. Again, speed of decision-making can be helpful if the decisions made are accurate or effective. And if we're seeing that people are making ineffective decisions, poor decisions, or if their speed of decision making isn't as fast as we would like, or perhaps too fast in certain cases, we can look at the components and perhaps identify specific areas to focus in the decision making process in which to enhance performance. So we look at our overall team scores on this, and we can see that in general they're, again, pretty good. We've got a pretty good team, but we might look a little bit at generating potential solutions in the decision-making process and in communicating decision rationale when implementing decisions. So in our first step, the various steps in the process are establishing a positive decision-making environment, generating potential solutions, evaluating alternatives to a decision, actually deciding, then later checking the decision, and then communicating with other team members or other external personnel the rationale behind the decision and what it's intended to accomplish. So in our first scoring, we can see that everybody seems to be pretty good at participating and establishing a positive decision-making environment. Obviously, member C stands out a little bit on that, but everybody is very positive on that. Generating potential solutions, we can see that member E is a little bit more strong at that, where perhaps we could work with members A and D in their solution contribution and the need to contribute. There may be reasons why they aren't contributing, or they don't feel that they should contribute, or that they're just not coming up with the ideas. That could relate to thinking preferences. There could be all sorts of reasons, but at least we can identify that if we're going to work with anybody in that regard, it would be potentially member A and member D. In evaluating alternatives, everybody seems to be pretty good at that. We see that member B is not as focused on that. That said, it could be, when I think of member B and I start to put together various components, member B is very fast decision maker, very proactive. There's a number of different characteristics that lead member B to do things very quickly. And so, to a certain extent, may just move forward, believing that the right decision is made. May see it faster than other people, who knows? But again, that tells us maybe we should investigate that component to a certain extent. Actually deciding, everybody seems to be very strong at that. And again, we can see member E is strong in these last three characteristics. Checking the decision can be an important thing. And again, with what I said about member B before, you would assume that maybe they don't check. So what I'm seeing is that they're very confident in their decision making, and perhaps come to an alternative relatively quickly, but they will check afterwards. Now, comparatively, member A doesn't, and this could create a problem where, if poor performance results are occurring, are people, before they're implementing a change or something related to the decision, going back and checking it, and perhaps even communicating with other people involved in the decision to make sure that it's the right course of action. So that could be something to identify as well. And then when we come to communicating about the implementation of a decision, everybody seems to be relatively the same. We might do some teamwork in communication, teamwork in from a managerial leadership standpoint in communicating decision making or vision or whatever. So this could tell us that there could be an opening for more open communication when it comes to decision making. But again, our people across the board are fairly strong. So in this final chart of our section, we have some of the components that we think are important to team membership and team management. And as I mentioned before, when we were looking at it as a subcategory, I don't tend to distinguish an awful lot between somebody who's going to be good at managing a team and their ability to be a strong team membership. I think that you can't really be an effective team manager unless you have an understanding of and you display the characteristics of good team membership. The first category that we look at component is team development, and this is again from a managerial standpoint, understanding the need to develop the people around, having a team mentality. So the team first over individuals, and for the most part, our people are very similar on that. The next is again a communicative element where we're encouraging communication among the team, so feedback about team issues. From a managerial standpoint, it would be providing feedback to the team on information that would be relevant to their performance. Here we can see that member E is very strong at that, but member A could perhaps look at that in a different way and understand the importance of sharing information. One of the things that we find in the communication process is that people who don't need to receive a lot of information or a lot of support, is another way to look at it, don't tend to see the need in other people to get that. So that may be an element with member A is just to communicate to them the need to be open about communication with team members so that everybody is on board and everybody's understanding what's happening. In our next category, we've got participating and articulating a vision. And again, from a leadership standpoint, being able to communicate a vision to the team members, but also from a team member standpoint, that vision is usually a product of team participation. So what we're seeing here is that definitely we've got strength in most of our members there, but member D needs to have more insight into their need to not only discuss, if they're in a team manager's role, their vision and direction of where the team is headed, but actually to participate in the process. So from a leadership standpoint, this is an indicator. And again, we would go back to other sections, primarily cognitive and then strategic leadership and those kinds of components, to look at team member D in that regard as well. Why are they not as on board when it comes to participation and the articulation of a vision? Then when we look at managing conflict, our people are all very good at that, and so this would be a very good team that would reduce the amount of conflict and keep conflict on a professional level. Understanding group roles and structures. So what's my function in the team? What should other people's functions be in the team? Understanding that. Our three members here seem very strong, but again, A and D may need some help in understanding their role in the team and what other people are doing, and the importance of identifying that and dividing function even to a certain extent. Then when we look at the ability to develop other team members, again, it can relate to a managerial role where you're developing your team members on an individual basis rather than across the board with the whole team. But it also requires that from a sharing standpoint, we mentioned before in a previous chart that perhaps one team member could share their organizational techniques or skills with somebody who may not see that or be as adept at that. And so in this case, from an internal team member to team member standpoint, we might want to encourage team A or member A to embrace that a little bit more, and because the other members understand the need that when everybody is performing, and if we can help everybody to perform, then we as a team are better, and we just want to make sure that we can get that across to team member A as well. And then finally, understanding and collaboration, which is a part of all of the other components. Again, team member A could possibly use some work with that. From a managerial standpoint, I can see to a certain extent that member E tends to show the strongest, and perhaps member B has some elements of that, of team membership, and would possibly be a strong team manager because of that. So again, when we look at from that standpoint, member A would need perhaps some developmental work to help them integrate and interact a little bit more effectively with the other team members. And certainly that is going to be reflected in strong scores on understanding the roles and understanding the team dynamics and how to best collaborate to be a productive and high-performing team.